dropped a bomb on Sodom and Gomorrah, and that's the end of that. So why did God bring that judgment? Now, there are a couple of possible explanations that people have offered, okay? For one, and this was a standard for a long time, God was mad at the residents of Sodom and Gomorrah because they were inhospitable. Well, they were. But it kind of misses the point, doesn't it? Because it's kind of like saying that a man who murdered his wife was an insensitive husband. I mean, yeah, sexual assault on visitors, that's not good manners. But having bad manners is not a crime according to God. Well, maybe it's the sexual assault itself. So the rape. People say that, but there was no rape, as it turned out. There was just an attempted rape. So we just understand that God delivered the most powerful and devastating judgment in the entire Old Testament, save for the flood, on the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah because they had bad manners and because they tried to do something that they weren't able to do. It doesn't make sense to me, okay? One other option, Jude says that they went after strange flesh, that is, they left their proper abode and went after strange flesh, and so maybe the crime was trying to have sex with angels. The problem with that explanation is there is no indication whatsoever that the men of the city, or even Lot, knew that the men that were visiting were angels. Okay, so that's not going to work either.
You serious?
That's the promise. Right after that, we get into the dark story of Sodom and Gomorrah. And this takes us from 816 all the way to 929. And even in that, if you look on the PDF file, that story alone breaks up into 3 sections, but it's really one story. We're first told about when God and the 2 angels get up to leave, they're making their way to Sodom, and there's this conversation between God, Yahweh, and Abraham. And basically, Abraham is told, hey, I'm going to destroy Sodom because it is an evil, wicked city. And Abraham knows that, hey, my nephew Lot and his family live there. I don't want them to die. And so we have this interesting banter between Yahweh and Abraham. And Abraham starts off by saying, are you really going to destroy the whole city? What if there's 50 righteous people? You're going to just kill 50 innocent righteous people just because the city as a whole is bad? And Yahweh goes, okay, good. Deal. If there's 50 righteous people, I won't destroy the city. Then Abraham goes oh, wait a second. What if there's 40? And he starts talking God down because Abraham knows that Sodom is not a good place. And basically, the back and forth goes back and forth. And Abraham eventually talks God down to agreeing that if there's 10 people, 10 righteous people, I won't destroy the city. Let's see if there's 10 people. Then we get into chapter 19 and the actual story of Sodom and Gomorrah. And what happens is we're told that these 2 men, the 2 angels, go into the city square. And in the ancient world, if you go into the city square at night, you're expected that somebody's going to show hospitality to you because they don't have hotels. We're told that Lot sees them and brings them to his house, and he's going to house them for the night because he's showing hospitality. Then we have the weird story, the disgusting, disturbing story that night the men of Sodom come and pound on Lot's doors and basically says, bring those 2 visitors out, we want to rape them. And oftentimes this is seen as, this is a condemnation of homosexuality. That's not really the point. The point of the story, as weird as it sounds to us, is the sin of Sodom is they're not caring for the sojourner, the journeyman. They're not showing hospitality. Now, it involves brutality, and obviously that's not seen as good, but the sin is that they don't care for the sojourner and the wanderer. And therefore, the story goes, they try to take them. Lot says, this is a travesty, why don't you take my daughter?
And it's like, okay, when his daughters, get him drunk and commit incest with him, so that because they're without husbands, And again, we don't understand the magnitude because of our culture. We don't understand the magnitude of this culture for women in not having husbands. Basically, if you don't have a husband, you are either going to just die of exposure or you're left to a life of prostitution. It's just not a good situation, for women. And so they're thinking we need husbands and children, or not husbands, but we need children that are going to be within the family name that attaches us to the family of Lot, and so and we're going to be okay. And again, we don't understand the sort of patriarchal worldview and culture, especially the situation that it puts women in antiquity. But they do this, and scholars have thought, out of this episode, when they get their dad, to sleep with them, what do we get? We get the Ammonites and the Moabites. And interestingly enough, those two places are going to have giant clan populations later. Now, they're going to get wiped out by the descendants of Esau. This is Deuteronomy 2 and 3, before the Israelites ever get to the Transjordan where these people settle. Oh. I mean, God is specifically going to say to Moses and Joshua, leave the Ammonites and the Moabites alone. The descendants of Esau came in there. They already took care of the problem with the Rephaim. Just keep going up. And God is specifically leading them through the territory of Moab and Ammon all the way up to Bashan. Why? Because that is where the last of the Rephaim live.
A lot of people don't know about the Esau descendants taking care of them.
Yep. It's easy to read over it, but Deuteronomy 2 and 3. And so scholars look at this and go, you know what? In hindsight, you can look at this episode and say, that this behavior is actually a mimicking of what happened earlier in Genesis 6, even though it doesn't involve, the angels. It's a sexual transgression that leads to, this stuff going on. Now, again, I'm not married to that view. It is a view in scholarship. I'm still wondering about it because, just for the sake of your audience, just so that they know that they're interested. There are people who wonder if this is the point of Genesis 19, is it also the point of Paul's comments in Romans 1? Is there something to be said here in 2 Peter 2 when Peter mentions the angels that sinned and then also loops in the Sodom story? Is the point here with the men beating on Lot's door to get after the two angels that they think are men, instead of just instead of it being about a homosexual relationship, is it actually about that kind of relationship with angelic beings? In other words, is it another mimicking of Genesis 6 in that way? So there's a lot of stuff floating around in Genesis 19 that people wonder about because of how it plays out in Israelite history.
Also, I think we keep going all over the place, but there's also a certain legend or something you might want to call it that says that Azazel, or Azrael as they call him, ended up being Esau's guardian angel.
Yeah, I've not heard of that. Can you pull it out of your head what the source of that is? Like what, a text or something? Because that would be interesting.
I briefly came across it on Wikipedia, but Wikipedia is generally garbage. So,
but it could be looping into something worthwhile though. That's interesting. I'll have to look at that. That's interesting.
Yeah. I mean, generally with the whole Lot and his daughter story, I've always liked to emphasize the notion of how, because I think that's a problem that I get with a lot of evangelicals, where they don't sort of get how important hospitality was in the ancient times. Mm-hmm. And the fact of the matter is with hospitality is that there was often a connection with, that it could always possibly be a deity that could be trying to test you, to see what you would.
I follow what you mean. Yeah.
And if you don't, because I think I've noticed this happens in Greek mythology, and this is a common theme where basically you'll have a deity or you'll have one of his messengers come down and, basically test the citizens to see if they'll be hospitable. and when they're not, they just wipe out the city. So,
well, the idea generally gets picked up in Hebrews 13. Where he says, don't neglect, to show hospitality to strangers because some have entertained angels without knowing it, so that the idea of a visitation being kind of, lurking behind hospitality, maybe there's a connection there.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a good thing to notice, because if you do insert that into the Lot story, and obviously people would have known that, like even people of Sodom and Gomorrah would have known that sort of thing, where there could be a messenger lurking, but yet they just still didn't care. They still wanted to do what they wanted to do. So that adds a sort of another layer to it.
Yeah, it makes it even more heinous, if that's the case.
I just think it's an interesting food for thought sort of thing to just think about with the culture.
All right, now we get to what I expect you thought was the juiciest part of the story, given your perverse anti-historical perspective. Let me make this very simple, and you better sit down. The men of Sodom were not practicing homosexuals. Yes, that's what I said. Pick yourself up off the floor and listen carefully. What you don't get here is that homosexual rape was perceived as an act of dominance. I'm sure you've heard it said even today that rape is not a crime of sex but of power. Well, in this case, more so. The point here was to show these visitors who is in charge and destroy their personal honor. So while I'm sure you are enjoying all the rectal jokes, you missed the point because your grasp of the cultural context comes off a bag of Cheetos.